The morning fog sat low over the mall like it couldn't decide whether to stay or go. It was that kind of March, cold enough to bite, but soft enough that you'd almost forgive it. The kind of morning where London feels like a painting someone left half-finished. Gray and gold, and the distant sound of ceremonial boots on wet pavement. Catherine had been awake since 5. Not because of the schedule, though the schedule was relentless, every minute accounted for, every movement already choreographed somewhere in a briefing document she'd read 3 times. Not because of the children, either. George and Charlotte and Louis were still tucked into the particular silence that only exists in houses where small people are sleeping. She was awake because of the mirror. Not vanity. Not nerves, exactly. Something quieter than both of those things. She stood in front of it in the half-dark, her hair still down, the blue of her dress laid out on the chair behind her like a question she hadn't answered yet. And she just looked at the woman who was going to stand in front of thousands of people today and represent something enormous. Something she'd said yes to when she was young enough to believe that love was the whole of it. Love was not the whole of it. Love was the reason she got up every morning and did the whole of it. That was different. Her reflection blinked. She reached for the pearls. Across the hall, William was already dressed. He had this thing he did before big public days. She'd noticed it years ago and never mentioned it because some things you observe and hold gently rather than name out loud. He'd stand at the window, hands loose at his sides, and just watch whatever was happening outside. The garden, the street, a pigeon doing something embarrassing on the gate. He wasn't thinking about the pigeon. She'd learned that too. He was doing the thing his mother had probably taught him without meaning to. The thing of finding one small, ordinary thing to look at, to hold on to, before the day became a thing that belonged to everyone else. Today it was a red delivery van idling at the corner. She watched him watch it for a moment. Then, she said, "You've got a crease." He turned, looked down at his sleeve. There was no crease. There was absolutely no crease. He looked back up at her. "There's no crease." "I know," she said. "But you look too serious." Something shifted in his face. The particular shift, almost invisible to anyone who hadn't spent 20-odd years memorizing the geography of that face, that meant he was trying not to smile and losing. He lost. "Are you nervous?" he asked. She considered lying. It would have been easy. She was very good at the composure, at the seamless public front, had spent years building it into something real and solid rather than just performed. "No," she said. "Then, yes. Then, not about the event." He didn't ask what she meant. He just crossed the room, straightened a collar that didn't need straightening, and left his hand there at the back of her neck for just a second. Warm. Familiar. Specific. She breathed. "Right," she said. "Let's go." Westminster Abbey had been dressed for the occasion the way Westminster Abbey always is, as though it was born ready, as though centuries of this kind of day had simply become part of its stonework. Flowers from across the Commonwealth lined the nave. Colors that didn't exist in an English March. Burnt orange, deep violet, green so saturated it seemed to vibrate. Delegations from 56 nations. Music threading through the cold air from an organ that had been here since before anyone alive could remember. The crowds outside were something else. They'd started gathering before dawn, which always amazed her, though it probably shouldn't anymore. People with folding chairs and thermos flasks and Union Jacks and flags from Jamaica and Kenya and Canada and Australia and New Zealand, all layered together in the particular democratic chaos of a British public gathering. Children on shoulders. Grandmothers in wheelchairs who had been at events like this before William was born. Someone had a sign that said, "We love you, Catherine," in letters large enough to read from a moving car. She saw it through the window and felt something complicated happen in her chest. Not ego. The opposite of ego, actually. That particular vertigo of realizing that people you have never met have invested something real in the idea of you. That your good days, and your hard days, and your illness, and your recovery had been witnessed by strangers who cared about the outcome. That was a weight. It was also, if she was honest, a kind of grace. William saw her see the sign. He said nothing, just touched the back of her hand, briefly, where no camera could catch it. The service was long in the way that meaningful things are long. Not tediously, but densely, each moment pressing against the next. Readings from across the Commonwealth. Prayers in languages she didn't speak, but whose music she could feel. A children's choir from Trinidad that sang something so clean and heartful that the sound seemed to climb the walls and come back down changed. She kept her hands still in her lap, kept her face what it needed to be. But her mind did that thing it does during ceremonies. that split existence between the public surface and the private interior. She was present, and she was also somewhere very small and very personal, turning something over quietly. She had been ill, not ancient history. Recent enough that she still caught herself some mornings surprised by how normal felt. Recent enough that the word recovery still had texture. Recent enough that standing in this abbey, in this dress, with this many people in the world knowing her name and wishing her well, felt less like duty and more like something she wanted to be precise about. Gratitude. Not performed gratitude. Not the public-facing kind. The raw, slightly startling kind that arrives when you have been close enough to the edge of ordinary life to know what ordinary life actually costs. She was grateful to be here. She was grateful for the cold, for the choir, for the red delivery van that William had watched at the window this morning. For all of it. The bishop was speaking. She brought herself back. The moment happened between moments. That's the thing about the real ones. They don't announce themselves. You can't schedule them into a briefing document. They arrive in the gaps, in the margins, in the half-second between one public obligation and the next when two people who have built a life together forget, briefly, that they are also something other than themselves. It was after the service, before the formal photographs. The kind of institutional pause that exists in every large official event, when the machinery is reconfiguring, when aides are consulting clipboards, when someone is quietly solving a problem involving a missing dignitary and a tight corridor. They were standing together in the side aisle, not holding hands, not performing anything, just standing in the way of two people who have stood beside each other so long that their bodies know the distance instinctively, close enough to speak quietly, shoulder almost at shoulder. A little girl had broken through. She couldn't have been more than 6. Red coat, white tights, one shoe slightly unlaced, which gave her a lopsided urgency as she navigated between adult legs with the absolute confidence of someone who had not yet learned that you cannot simply walk up to people. A woman behind her, grandmother, probably, from the matching look of mortified love on her face, was reaching but not quite catching. The little girl reached Catherine first. She held up a drawing. Crayon. Waxy and enthusiastic. It depicted, and this required a moment of generous interpretation, 2 figures with crowns and a lot of yellow around them, which might have been sunlight or might have been an artistic impression of formal hair. That's you, the girl said, pointing at the taller crayon figure with complete authority. And that's the prince. You're in love. The adults around them did the collective inhale of people watching a child be accidentally perfect. Catherine crouched down, not bent forward, actually crouched, dress and composure and all, to be level with this 6-year-old who had decided that official proceedings were less important than delivering her art. It's beautiful, she said. And she meant it in the way you can only mean it when you're looking at something made entirely without guile. I made the crowns gold, the little girl said, with the gravity of an artist explaining a choice. The gold is exactly right. The girl looked at her for a moment with the unfiltered assessment only small children can deliver. The look that has not yet learned to be polite instead of honest. You look different on the telly, she announced. Do I? Prettier, she said. Then, apparently done, she turned and went back to her grandmother without ceremony. Catherine stood up. She turned to William. And there it was. That was the moment. The one the cameras almost caught. The one that rippled through the crowd in the way that real things do. Not because it was grand, not because it was choreographed, but because it was completely, helplessly human. He was laughing. Not the public laugh. Not the warm official smile deployed at appropriate intervals throughout long ceremonies. The actual laugh. The one that involves his whole face. The one that makes him look 22 again. The one she had fallen in love with long before she understood what loving him would require of her. She started laughing too. She couldn't help it. The 6-year-old. The gold crowns. Prettier in person. The absurdity and sweetness of it all crashing together in the middle of this enormous formal day. They stood there in that side aisle of Westminster Abbey and laughed like 2 people who had earned the right to laugh like this, with the whole weight of everything behind them, and the little drawing of 2 crayon figures in golden light in her hands. The crowd that could see them, and many could, the aisle was not private, there were cameras and phones at every angle, went very quiet in the way crowds do when they witness something they weren't supposed to see, but can't look away from. Not a performance. A marriage. The photograph, when it circulated later, would be imperfect in the technical sense. Slightly overexposed. Taken at an angle that was not the official angle. Half a dozen cleaner, better composed images existed from the same day, professionally lit, perfectly staged, both of them facing forward with the appropriate gravitas of their position. None of those photographs broke the internet. This one did. It caught Catherine mid-laugh, head tilted slightly down, one hand at her mouth in that gesture she makes when something has genuinely got her, eyes bright in a way that the careful official photographs never quite captured. And William beside her, turned toward her, the drawing still visible in her other hand, laughing at exactly the same thing for exactly the same reason. Two people, in a very old building, laughing. The caption that ran with it on about 1,000 different accounts was some variation of, "This is what 20 years looks like," which was not precisely accurate. It was closer to 15 years of marriage and rather more years of everything else. But the feeling of the caption was right. The feeling of the photograph was right. Something that had survived and softened and deepened into this. Two people who could still crack each other up in the middle of a Commonwealth ceremony because a 6-year-old with a crayon had said exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment. Outside, the crowd felt it before they saw it. There's a thing that happens at public gatherings, a kind of atmospheric shift, a change in the emotional weather before information travels. The people at the front of the barriers passed it backward through expression and nudge and the particular electricity of collective attention. Something had happened. Something good. By the time William and Catherine emerged for the formal walkabout, the crowd was already running at a different frequency. Warmer, louder, more personal. Women who had been holding flowers for 40 minutes thrust them forward not with the stiff reverence of official occasions, but with something more like affection between people who know each other, or feel they do. A man in a Jamaica football shirt was calling out something that got lost in the noise, but was clearly enthusiastic. A group of university students had a banner that had started the day as a Commonwealth solidarity message and had been hastily amended in black marker to add a small crayon drawing of two stick figures with crowns. Catherine saw it. She stopped walking. William followed her gaze. Read the banner. Looked at her. They already know, he said. They always know, she said. Later, much later, after the photographs and the reception and the interminable but necessary conversations with 56 delegations, after the car ride home through a London that had softened into evening, after Charlotte had demanded a full account of the day, and George had pretended not to be interested, and then asked for questions. After Lewis had fallen asleep on William's shoulder during what was supposed to be a brief goodnight. Later, she sat in the quiet of their kitchen. Not a stateroom. A kitchen. With a kettle that took slightly too long, and a fruit bowl with one very optimistic banana, and a chair that she had picked out herself for no reason more elevated than that she liked the way it felt to sit in. She had the drawing. She'd asked if she could keep it, and the little girl had considered this with appropriate seriousness before granting permission. It was slightly crumpled now. The gold crowns had lost some structural integrity. The yellow light that may have been sunlight or may have been hair had transferred, faintly, onto her palm. She propped it against the fruit bowl, looked at it. Two small figures with smudged crowns and yellow light all around them, made by a 6-year-old who had not been taught yet to see them as symbols, who had just seen two people who, in her understanding of the world, were in love, and had drawn it, and brought it, and handed it over with the complete sincerity of someone who hadn't yet learned to be embarrassed by sincerity. You're in love. Not. You represent the institution. Not. You carry the weight of history. Not. You have survived things that would have broken other arrangements, other people. Just, you're in love. Here is my drawing. The gold is exactly right. William came in. He'd changed out of the formal clothes into what Charlotte called his boring dad outfit. Navy jumper. The jeans with the slight tear at the knee that he refused to replace for reasons he claimed were sentimental, and Catherine was fairly certain were stubbornness. He looked at the drawing. You kept it. Obviously I kept it. He pulled out the chair across from her. Sat down with the slight exhale of a man who has been standing in formal shoes for 6 hours. Looked at the drawing the way you look at something that has caught you off guard by matching. She was something, he said. She was everything, Catherine said. He glanced up. She meant it exactly as it sounded. Not everything as in hyperbole, but everything as in. That was it. That was the whole day distilled into a 6-year-old with one unlaced shoe and a piece of crayon art, and total unguarded certainty about what she had witnessed. Because the rest of it was real too. The Abbey was real. The delegations were real. The prayers and languages she didn't speak, but felt were real. The flowers from across the Commonwealth were real. The woman with the sign that said, "We love you, Catherine," and what that had done to something in her chest, real. But the girl had handed her a piece of paper with two people in golden light, and said you're in love, and that had landed in a completely different register. In the register that doesn't have anything to do with duty. She thought about the morning, the mirror, the woman in the half-dark trying to locate herself before the day took over. She thought about the red delivery van. She thought about William's hand at the back of her neck, warm and specific, lasting exactly long enough. She'd been ill. She'd been frightened. And she was honest with herself about that, in the private hours, even if the public version was measured and careful and gave nothing away that might cause unnecessary worry. She had sat with a fear that had no good name, and come out the other side of it changed in ways she was still cataloging. Some losses, some strange unexpected gifts, a new and rather fierce relationship with ordinary mornings, with the weight of the kettle, with a chair she'd chosen for no better reason than comfort, with the particular laugh of the man across the table from her, who was currently examining a child's crayon drawing with the concentration he usually reserved for briefing documents. The proportions are off, he said. William, I'm just saying. She made you significantly taller. I am significantly taller. You are not significantly. He stopped, looked at her. Are you crying? No, Catherine, I'm not. I'm almost. There's a difference. He was quiet for a moment. Good day, he asked, quietly. The real question underneath the easy one. She looked at the drawing, at the smudged gold crowns and the yellow light and the two small figures who, in the theology of a 6-year-old, were simply, plainly, in love. Yes, she said. Then, one of the good ones. He reached across the table, not dramatically, not in the way of moments designed to be witnessed, just reached across and put his hand over hers the way people do when they have been reaching across tables toward each other for long enough that it has become the most natural movement in their repertoire. Unremarkable in the way that only the most essential things become unremarkable. The kettle clicked. Neither of them moved. Outside, London was doing what London does at the end of a long day, settling into itself, the traffic thinning, the lights coming on in windows, the ordinary private lives of millions of people resuming their shapes after the interruption of ceremony. Somewhere a child with a red coat was probably asleep with no idea that the drawing she'd given away was propped against a fruit bowl next to an optimistic banana. Somewhere a woman who had stood in front of her mirror at 5 in the morning trying to locate herself was located. Here, in this kitchen, with this man, with the gold crowns and the yellow light and 20-some years of the whole of it, the weight and the grace and the fear and the recovery and the laughing in the side aisle of Westminster Abbey like nothing in the world exists except the thing that is funny right now. You're in love. Yes, Catherine thought. Still, exactly that. And